The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom glittered, casting 1,000 tiny rainbows across the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. My Aunt Carol, dripping in diamonds that looked as cold and hard as her heart, held up the bottle of wine I'd brought. She didn't even try to hide her sneer. "Oh, Leo," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire table to hear. "Still making your little garage wines? How quaint." My cousin Mark, the family's golden boy, snickered into his champagne flute. "Give him a break, Mom." It's the thought that counts, right? Even if the thought is worth about $20. My own parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes refusing to meet mine. They were embarrassed, not by my aunt's cruelty, but by my very existence, my simple, off-the-rack suit, my cheap gift, my failure to live up to the family name. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, and gave them a small, tight smile. They had no idea that their annual hospital charity gala, the pinnacle of their social calendar, was about to become the stage for my final act. They were all so busy looking down on me, they never thought to look up at the main stage where the master of ceremonies was tapping the microphone. They were laughing at my humble offering, completely unaware that my real gift wasn't the bottle of wine in my aunt's hand, but the $5 million donation that had funded the entire new pediatric wing they were about to dedicate. You're probably wondering why I would hide something like that from my own family, only to reveal it in the most public and humiliating way possible. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning, to a stuffy hospital room and a promise whispered to my dying grandmother, a promise my family forced me to break. My grandmother, Eleanor, was the only one who ever saw me. While the rest of the family measured worth in stock portfolios and country club memberships, she measured it in character. She was the one who taught me how to fix a leaky faucet, how to identify constellations in the night sky, and how to believe in myself when no one else would. To everyone else, Mark was the future. He got new cars for his birthday and a fat allowance for doing nothing. I got my grandmother's time, which, I would later realize, was infinitely more valuable. The day she died, the whole family gathered in her sterile hospital room. It felt less like a vigil and more like a corporate meeting before the reading of a will. Aunt Carol was already talking about what they'd do with Grandma's house, while my mother fretted over the antique silverware. As her breathing grew shallow, my grandmother waved everyone else away and motioned for me to come closer. Her hand, thin and papery, gripped mine with surprising strength. "Don't let them break you, Leo," she whispered, her voice a faint rasp. She pressed a small, worn, leather-bound journal into my hands. It wasn't full of money or stock certificates. It was her personal book of recipes, notes, and little bits of wisdom she'd collected over a lifetime. They only understand money. You need to understand value. Promise me you'll build something real, something that lasts, I promised. Tears streamed down my face as I clutched the book to my chest. It was the last thing she ever gave me. When she was gone, and the nurses had left the room, Aunt Carol snatched the book from my hands. She flipped through the delicate yellowed pages. "A cookbook?" she said, a cruel laugh escaping her lips. "She left you a cookbook? Well, I guess every family needs a chef." Mark peered over her shoulder. "Maybe you can sell some pies on the side of the road, Leo?" For gas money. My parents just looked away, their silence a ringing endorsement of the mockery. They thought it was junk. They thought I was worthless. They had no idea that hidden within those pages, scribbled in the margins of a recipe for apple wine, was a complex chemical formula my grandfather, a chemist, had been working on before he passed. It was his forgotten legacy, and my grandmother had just handed me the key. My family treated my grandmother's funeral as the final chapter of my story with them. They had written me off. I went to a state university, studying chemistry, funded by a patchwork of student loans and greasy late nights flipping burgers. Every holiday was a fresh ordeal. I'd show up at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and the questions would start, each one a thinly veiled jab. Still in school, Leo? Aunt Carol would ask, looking me up and down as if I were something she'd scraped off her shoe. Mark just got a promotion to vice president. He's buying a condo downtown. My father would just nod along, telling me I should be more like my cousin, that the family business always had a place for me in the warehouse if my science experiment didn't work out. They thought my chemistry degree was a joke, a pointless pursuit. Little did they know, I wasn't just studying textbooks, I was deciphering my grandfather's legacy. In my final year, while struggling with a project on polymer chemistry, a memory sparked. The formula in Grandma's book. I dug it out from the bottom of my trunk. Looking at it with trained eyes, I realized it wasn't a recipe for wine at all. The molecular structures, the bonding agents, it was a formula for a revolutionary bioadhesive. A glue that could bond human tissue without stitches, leaving no scars and reducing healing time by half. My grandfather hadn't been a hobbyist. He had been a visionary. That discovery lit a fire in me. I lived in the university library and slept on a cot in the lab. Every dollar I earned went towards renting lab time and buying raw materials. After graduation, I took the biggest risk of my life. I used my small savings and a high-interest personal loan to found a company. I called it Eleanor Biologics. My parents were beside themselves with fury. "You have a degree! Go get a job!" My mother screamed over the phone. "Mark is looking at buying a boat. You're living in a garage playing with glue." The garage part was true. I couldn't afford an office. For 3 years, I was a ghost. I pitched my product to over 50 investment firms. Every one of them said no. The rejections were brutal, and word of my failures always got back to my family, cementing their narrative of me as the family loser. But I remembered my grandmother's words. Build something real. So I kept going. Finally, a small, unconventional venture capital firm saw what the big ones had missed. They gave me a chance. And with their funding, everything changed. 6 months later, we had a perfected, market-ready product. A year after that, we signed an exclusive 9-figure contract with the largest medical device company in the world. I was on paper wealthier than my entire family combined, and they had absolutely no idea. I could have bought my family's struggling business with my pocket change. I could have bought my aunt's house and had her evicted. But that kind of revenge was too simple, too crude. It was about money, and they had taught me that true power wasn't about having money, but about showing them how little theirs meant. So, I continued to play the part of Leo, the struggling chemist. I drove the same 10-year-old sedan, lived in the same modest apartment, and let them believe I was still one bad month away from begging Mark for a job. My anonymity was my greatest asset. I hired a brilliant CEO to be the public face of Eleanor Biologics, while I remained the silent, controlling shareholder, a ghost in my own machine. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was my mother. "Leo, dear," she began, her voice dripping with that familiar, saccharine pity. "The hospital gala is in a few weeks. Your Aunt Carol is chairing the committee again, you know. We've reserved a seat for you at our table. Please try to make it." There was a pause. "And Leo, do try to look the part this year. And for the donation, a simple gift card would be fine. We don't want a repeat of that casserole from last year." The bait was offered, and I was ready to take it. This was the opening I had been waiting for. Their sacred stage, the one night a year they dedicated to polishing their public image as philanthropists and community pillars. It was perfect. A quick search online told me everything I needed to know. The hospital was desperately trying to raise $5 million for a new pediatric wing. Aunt Carol's name was all over the campaign, her face smiling in press photos, promising to deliver. But privately, they were falling short. Through my attorney, I contacted the hospital's president directly. I offered the entire $5 million as an anonymous donation. The board was ecstatic. They agreed to my terms without hesitation. First, The donation would remain a secret until the gala. Second, the new wing would be named the Eleanor Vance Pediatric Wing, in honor of my grandmother. Third, my identity as the benefactor was to be revealed live on stage at the end of the night. The pieces were in place. I bought my ticket, a single seat at my family's table of judgment. I went to the mall and bought a perfectly adequate but utterly forgettable navy blue suit. And for my gift, I chose a bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. Not from my garage, but a respectable label that cost exactly $50. It was just enough to be seen as a pathetic attempt to fit in, and just cheap enough for them to mock without reservation. The trap wasn't the money or the announcement. The trap was their own arrogance, and they were about to walk right into it. Walking into that ballroom felt like stepping onto a battlefield of my own design. Every condescending smile, every dismissive glance from the city's elite was a validation of my plan. I navigated the maze of tables until I found my family. They were holding court, the picture of old money arrogance. When I arrived, the conversation stopped for a beat. 8 pairs of eyes appraised my simple suit, my plain tie, and the unadorned gift bag in my hand. I placed the bottle on the table. "For the silent auction," I said calmly. Aunt Carol picked it up as if it were contaminated. That's when she delivered the line I had been waiting for. "Oh, Leo. Still making your little garage wines? How quaint." Mark's laughter was the chorus. My father cleared his throat and studied the floral centerpiece with intense interest. My mother just gave me a weak, apologetic smile that did nothing to hide her shame. I simply nodded and took my seat, letting their scorn wash over me. It no longer stung. It was merely the overture to the symphony of their downfall. The dinner was a masterclass in being invisible. They talked over me and around me, discussing Mark's upcoming ski trip to Aspen and Aunt Carol's latest squabble at the yacht club. Mark, feeling particularly bold, leaned over and said, "So, Leo, how's the science project going?" "Still messing around in that garage? You know, we might have an opening in shipping and receiving soon. Real work, you know?" I just looked at him, held his gaze for a second too long, and said, "I'll keep that in mind, Mark." My quiet composure seemed to bother him more than any angry retort would have. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared and the lights dimmed. The MC took the stage. Aunt Carol straightened her posture, a self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. This was her moment. The MC praised the committee's hard work, giving a special nod to its chair, my aunt. She practically glowed with pride. Then his tone shifted. "Tonight, folks," the MC said, his voice booming through the speakers, "we are here to celebrate a miracle." A murmur went through the crowd. While our fundraising has been admirable, one donor has stepped forward to ensure that our dream for the children of this city becomes a reality. An anonymous benefactor has gifted the hospital the full $5 million to build the new pediatric wing. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. My family looked stunned. Aunt Carol's smile faltered. Who had stolen her thunder? The MC let the suspense build before continuing. In honor of this incredible generosity, and at the donor's request, the new state-of-the-art facility will be named the Eleanor Vance Pediatric Wing. The name hit our table like a physical blow. Eleanor, my grandmother, a woman they had buried not just in the ground, but in their memories, dismissed as an eccentric old lady with a worthless cookbook. Their faces were a perfect collage of confusion and disbelief. The dots were there, but they were still too arrogant to connect them. Aunt Carol was the first to speak, her voice a harsh whisper that cut through the polite applause for the announcement. Eleanor. Why would they name it after her? She never gave a dime to this hospital. Mark was shaking his head, already looking around the room, trying to spot the wealthy old acquaintance who must be playing some kind of strange prank. My mother simply stared at the stage, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. The MC on stage held up a hand for silence. "This extraordinary gift," he continued, his voice resonating with emotion, "comes from an individual who told us they wanted to honor a woman who taught them the true difference between price and value, someone who encouraged them to build something real." My father flinched. He recognized my grandmother's words. I saw his eyes dart towards me for a fraction of a second, a flicker of an impossible thought, before he dismissed it. It couldn't be. "It is now my great privilege," the MC declared, "to finally introduce this pillar of our community. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a round of applause for the benefactor of the $5 million gift, Mr. Leo Vance." For a full 5 seconds, there was absolute silence at our table. The name just hung there, an alien sound that didn't belong in their world of success and prestige. Then, the spotlight, a brilliant white circle, swung across the cavernous room and landed directly on me, on my cheap suit, on my stunned, frozen family. The reaction was a silent explosion. Aunt Carol's perfectly painted smile didn't just falter, it shattered. Her face went slack, her skin turning a pasty, sickly white under the ballroom lights. The diamonds on her neck suddenly looked like cheap glass. Mark, the golden boy, looked like he'd been electrocuted. His mouth was open, a half-chewed piece of bread still visible inside. He stared at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes, as if seeing me for the first time. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth as tears of pure, unadulterated shame streamed down her face. My father simply deflated, the decades of smug certainty draining out of him, leaving behind the empty husk of a man. A ripple of applause started, hesitant at first, then growing into a thunderous ovation as the rest of the room put the pieces together. I stood up slowly, deliberately. I straightened my tie and smoothed the front of my jacket. Without a single glance back at the wreckage of my family, I began my walk to the stage. Every eye in the room was on me. I could feel their collective gaze, a mixture of shock, curiosity, and dawning respect. I walked past tables of people who had never given me a second thought, people who were my family's friends, their rivals, their entire social universe. And in that moment, I owned them all. I reached the stage, shook the MC's hand, and stepped to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces until my eyes found my family. They were motionless, trapped in the spotlight's glare, their public execution complete. I gripped the sides of the podium, my knuckles white. I looked directly at the table where my family sat, paralyzed. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady and clear, amplified throughout the silent hall. "My grandmother Eleanor always told me to build things that matter. When she passed, she left me a legacy. It wasn't stocks or property. It was a legacy of wisdom, contained in a small, leather-bound book." I paused, letting the words sink in, and my eyes locked with Aunt Carol's. A legacy that some people might dismiss as nothing more than a worthless old cookbook. A collective gasp went through the section of the ballroom occupied by her friends. Her humiliation was now absolute and public. "Tonight," I finished, "we honor her, and we honor the simple truth that the greatest value is often hidden in the places we are taught to overlook." "Thank you." I gave a short nod and walked off the stage, not to the sound of applause, but to a wave of stunned, frantic whispering. The spell was broken. Suddenly, I was surrounded. The mayor was shaking my hand. The head surgeon of the hospital was clapping me on the back. People who wouldn't have given me the time of day an hour ago were pushing to give me their business cards. I ignored them all, my eyes fixed on the exit. My work here was done, but they weren't going to let me go that easily. They caught me near the grand staircase, a desperate, frantic cluster of my former family. Aunt Carol grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. The mask of civility had been burned away, leaving only ugly, desperate rage. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice trembling. You did this to ruin me. You planned this whole thing just to make me a laughingstock. Mark stumbled forward, his face pale and sweaty. Leo, what is going on? 5 million? Is this for real? Look, man, if you have that kind of money, you have to help us. The company, Dad's company, is sinking. We need a loan. Your family. Then came my mother, her face blotchy with tears. Leo, baby, please, she sobbed, reaching for me. We never knew. Why didn't you tell us? We've always been so proud of you, deep down. I looked at their faces, the fury, the greed, the pathetic, self-serving regret, and I felt nothing. The part of me that had once craved their approval had died long ago. I calmly removed Carol's hand from my arm. You think this was about you? I said, my voice dangerously quiet. This was never about you. It was about her. I looked at each of them in turn. Mark, last I heard, you had an opening in shipping and receiving. I'll keep it in mind. To my mother, I said, proud? You were ashamed. You spent 20 years being ashamed of me. Don't pretend otherwise now. I saved my last words for my father, who stood there mute and broken. You taught me what happens when a man has no spine, I said. Thank you for the lesson. I turned my back on them, collected my coat, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving them to drown in the ruins of the world they had built.